the old world is filled with species both ancient and new. From the elves that came to rule in Ulthuan in times now forgotten, to the dwarves and halflings who have long populated the high mountains and rolling valleys, to the lizardmen whose civilizations in the deep jungles of Lustria predate all. Together with ogres, trolls, beastmen, and all the other foul creatures twisted into existence by warpstone during the Great Catastrophe, and the greenskins, whose origins are beyond anyone's knowledge, the world has known life in a multitude of forms. Against such fantastically ancient or brutally cunning rivals, it is a wonder that the comparably mundane human race has not long since been ground into dust. And yet, in its ingenuity, adaptiveness, and indomitable spirit, mankind has not only survived, but now flourished across every face of the world. Their cities now rise over the ruins of their elven or dwarven predecessors. Their explorers delve deep into the once impenetrable jungles of Lustria, and even the mightiest warbands of Chaos Spawn or Greenskins are held at bay by their indomitable fortresses of industry, trade, and power. They can be found at the highest peaks and in the deepest mines, from the distant shores of forgotten lands to the centers of the greatest continents. From desert to tundra and every environment in between, humanity has tamed the world like few other races before it. Their civilizations are as numerous as their lands, and with each new territory settled, a new identity is shaped, cultures develop, and nations spring forth. From the rival city-states of Tilia come the great merchant princes. From the deserts of Araby arise the wealthy caliphates. Legendary duelists and explorers dominate Estalia, while the sweeping countryside of Bretonnia has brought forth a kingdom steeped in customs and tradition. The nations of humanity come in every conceivable form and under all manner of creeds. But in all the known world, only one civilization has ever possessed the immense potential, lauded history, and indomitable will to declare itself nothing less than the Empire of Man. It spans the heart of the old world, between the great mountains that divide the southern realms and frozen chaos wastes that lay to the north. Its reach is felt across all the world, and there are few decisions of state, economic, or military that do not take into account this juggernaut of human power. It is a nation of growth, pushing the boundaries of technology and human understanding, a place of immense cities and townships dotting wide landscapes of hill, moor, and forest. It has stood for centuries, since the wild years of humanity's fractured tribal existence, and by the grace of its god king Sigmar and the strength of its armies, it will stand for centuries more. The Empire was founded in the closing years of what men call the Classical Age, roughly 2,500 years in the distant past. Its founder, the legendary Sigmar Heldenhammer, was the son of a tribal king born under a twin-tailed comet, a birth noted as auspicious and filled with the promise of greatness. Through many years of war and diplomacy, he united the disparate human tribes of his region, reforming their settlements and lands into the cities and provinces that today dot the modern empire. In his early years, the young Sigmar forged a strong union with the dwarves' underking, Ironbeard. Both Sigmar and Ironbeard had worked to rid their lands of the Greenskins, and found in each other a powerful ally. Sigmar would forever cement their bond when he saved the dwarven regent from an orc war party and rescued the dwarves' besieged lands from an invasion of Greenskins. In victory, eternal friendship was sworn between men and dwarves, and the deed marked with the gifting of 12 magic swords and the iconic Warhammer Galmaraz to Sigmar himself. Awed by Sigmar's feats across the continent, the petty kingdoms of man flocked to his banner. A crown was placed atop his head by the high priest of the cult of Ulrich, proclaiming him emperor of all the tribes of man. Sigmar saw his new empire through many years of struggle and invasion, but never lost sight of his dream of uniting man. Much of these early days was spent settling disputes between former tribes that had refused to consolidate their old rivalries, and reaffirming the sword oaths the former kings had taken to serve him. In the 9th year of his rule, the petty banditry of local warlords and ever-present Norscan raids escalated into a full invasion headed by terrible champions of the Chaos gods Slaanesh and Khorne. The frenzied invaders defeated Sigmar's armies in the field, pushing them all the way back to the fledgling city of Middenheim. With the arrival of their dwarven allies, the siege was eventually broken. The immense bloodthirster that headed the assault was slain, and the raiders forced back into their frozen northern lands. With the threat of chaos thwarted, the greatest danger to the early empire came in its 15th year of existence from the great necromancer, Nagash. His undead armies swept unchecked across the southern provinces in search of the dark sorcerer's crown of power, and the empire was left as the last nation with the will and means to resist. After fighting retreats and narrow escapes across the countryside, a final confrontation was fought outside the gates of Reichdorf, the imperial capital and Sigmar's ancestral home. Donning the necromancer's own crown to protect himself from dark sorceries, Sigmar pushed into the center of the undead army and faced Nagash in single combat. Although outclassed, Sigmar was able to distract the necromancer by moving to destroy his crown, letting him land a mortal blow with Gal Maraz. With Nagash's spirit banished, his undead army fell apart. Such heroic deeds marked the 50-year rule of Sigmar, which ended when the first Emperor of Man set off to the east for an unknown purpose and to an unknown fate. With his passing, the system of Elector Counts was established, turning former tribal kings into the 12 Elector Counts and enabling these provincial leaders to elect a new emperor from their own ranks. For centuries and millennia, the power of the empire has remained spiritually in the hands of the emperor, but in reality comes from the Elector Counts. Though the emperor raises and leads armies, can summon the Elector Counts to court, and holds nominal reign over the empire, each province operates with a level of relative autonomy. Likewise, wealth is taxed in the emperor's name, but concentrated in the hands of the most powerful families and largest cities. Across the ages have come emperors that sought to rule purely through coercion, only to find their coffers empty and their armies in full rebellion. Periods of misrule such as these have led to a civil war that set the empire into ruin. Such wars have occurred often over the centuries, usually followed by periods of rebuilding that leave provinces vulnerable to revolt and invasion. If the enthroned emperor is defeated in such a conflict, a new emperor will be selected from amongst those electors who find themselves on the winning side. The greatest of these civil wars, the Age of Three Emperors, saw the empire plunged into a centuries-long period of disunity and infighting. When the Elector Counts failed to nominate a successor to the assassinated Mandred Skavenslayer, several of them claimed the title of Emperor or Empress for themselves, breaking the bonds that held the disparate provinces in confederation. Such political damage was hard to repair, and the provinces existed in a state of mutual conflict for nearly 200 years. It was only with the outbreak of the Great War against Chaos that this division was brought to an end, with the crowning of the legendary reformer Magnus the Pious. The Empire constitutes all the lands from the World's Edge Mountains in the east, to Kislev in the north, to the Black Mountains in the south, and the Grey Mountains in the west. These lands are divided into 11 provinces, each one a small state bound into the confederacy of the Empire. The provinces themselves are a patchwork of duchies, counties, grand duchies, baronies, leagues, and princedoms, with a further series of burghs and city-states existing outside the provincial system. The provinces of the Empire are as varied as their peoples, from the great forests and tundra of Kislev to the sleepy hills of Mootland, to the oft-besieged Ostermark and the haunted, shadowed lands of Sylvania, a once grand province now left to rot and ruin. Many of the Empire's city-states exist beyond the direct control of the nobility, instead being ruled by an elected burgomeister or council of officials. Here is where the emerging wealth classes of tradesmen, bankers, and innovators hold greatest sway, and where the most cutting-edge developments in technology and alchemy occur. First among these is the one-time imperial capital of Nuln, a center for religious pilgrimage and technological development that plays host to the famed Imperial Gunnery School. In comparison to the rigid feudal system that rules Bretonnia, the Empire's many guilds and schools provide a wide range of opportunity to a fledgling innovator. Yet while the occasional development has come from humble beginnings, the prohibitive cost of entry for these institutions keeps the greatest opportunities firmly in the hands of the wealthy and noble elite. Still, it cannot be denied that some of the most groundbreaking innovations of the old world have come from the alumni of the Empire's prodigious centers of learning. The Imperial Gunnery School has consistently produced some of the finest marksmen seen on the battlefield. Its students are drawn from the sons of wealthy families who display an aptitude for mathematics, an affinity for explosives, and, most importantly, are not directly in their family's line of succession. The quality of its teaching is upheld by its extremely selective core of graduates who go on to form the Empire's prized handgunner regiments. Likewise, the College of Engineers continue to revolutionize the nature of war and industry, with their greatest creations rivaling even the marvels of their dwarven counterparts. But it is the 8 Imperial Colleges of Magic that remain the foundation for human understanding of the arcane, training some of the finest wizards and alchemists in the old world. Under its current Supreme Patriarch, Balthazar Gelt, the institution as a whole has entered an unprecedented era of wealth and battle triumphs, whilst Gelt's own College of Gold has enjoyed an unrivaled position of dominance above the other 7. The rivalry between the colleges is both a historic strength and weakness of the institution. Though such division has undoubtedly driven innovation in harnessing the winds of magic, it will easily turn into a refusal to cooperate and even open conflict at the slightest provocation. The practice of magical dueling in the election of the Supreme Patriarch has seen the greatest of their number rise to a place of prominence, but has no doubt cost the colleges a great deal of their potential in the centuries since their founding. But while displays of magic have the potential to turn the tide of battle, the heart of the Empire is found in faith, steel, and gunpowder. No clearer is this statement seen than in the ranks of her Imperial armies. Swordsmen, halberdiers, and spearmen are the 3 most numerous forms of professional soldiery, forming the heart of the Empire's infantry corps. Collectively, they provide a block of fighting men capable of holding the line against all manner of horrors. These regulars are supplemented by the mercenaries and militias of the free companies, as well as the fanatical mobs of the flagellants. Ranks of outriders and pistoliers form the Empire's light cavalry divisions, often screening marching columns and providing vital reconnaissance duties. The ranged troops of the Empire are focused around the massed ranks of crossbowmen and archers, supplemented by the elite handgunners who are prized for their skill at felling heavily armored foes. The highly trained greatswords form the shock troops of Imperial armies, stout fighters bearing their immense and deadly blades. The famed knightly orders of the Empire provide contingents of mounted knights and the even rarer demigryph knights, each a devastating heavy cavalry force in its own right. Each knightly order has devoted itself to a particular god or aspect of war. Together, these specialists represent the primary offensive power that can sway the course of a battle. The College of Engineers supplies the Empire's most formidable engines of war, from the great cannons and mortars that devastate ranks of enemy soldiers and tear down fortress walls, to the extremely powerful but notoriously unpredictable Hellblaster volley cannons and Hellstorm rocket batteries. The War Wagon represents a more low-tech offensive transport and redeployment platform, whilst the ultimate symbol of the Empire's industrial mastery is found in the steam tank. Thundering, smoke-belching monstrosities, these steam-powered machines are plated in a thick armor that allows them to tear through foes like a battering ram, all the while firing cannon shot into the scattered survivors. Only 12 steam tanks were constructed before the secret to their design was lost, and to date, only 8 remain in active service. Although a rare sight, there are few things found in the old world more inspiring to Imperial soldiers and more demoralizing to the foe. Yet, equal to the strength of its armies in defending the lands of the Empire is the faith of its peoples. Though almost every god of every pantheon in the old world has followers across the Empire's lands, the cult of Sigmar is the predominant faith of the nation. The worship of Sigmar Heldenhammer began shortly after his disappearance, the early church adopting the symbols of the dwarven hammer Gal Maraz and the twin-tailed comet of his birth as its spiritual iconography. In its 2,500 years, the Sigmarite faith has become deeply entrenched within the political and social existence of the Empire. Its upper clergy maintain a strong presence within the imperial court, as deeply involved in its schemes and politics as any noble. In particular, their rivalry with the cult of Ulrich, an ancient religion that Sigmar himself espoused, constitutes the basis for a long-standing tradition of mutual suspicion, hostility, and accusations of heresy. In its purest form, however, the cult of Sigmar upholds bravery, the protection of the weak, and the struggle against the ruinous powers above all. Its grand theogonist, Volkmar the Grim, is a celebrated warrior priest with a long record of meeting the forces of chaos in open battle, bringing the rage of Sigmar down onto the servants of evil. His most recent crusade against the undead armies of the vampiric von Carsteins is a righteous struggle that brings hope to those most vulnerable to the horrors of Sylvania. The warrior priests and flagellants of the cult can often be found in the farthest borderlands, policing the sinners of provincial villages to the chagrin of the local magistrates. However, when the band of orcs, beastmen, and Norska return to raid and pillage, these chanting mobs are the first to answer the call to arms, seeking to honor Sigmar's memory with blade and hammer. The Empire's history is shaped by war and struggle, one that has continued unrelentingly into the modern day. From the Great War against Chaos that nearly saw the end of allied domains of Kislev, to the Battle of Nuln, where hideous ratmen devastated a full half of the great city, to the costly invasion of Warg Azag that burned the inner provinces, the future of the Empire continues to be forged in blood. As he enters his 20th year of regency, Emperor Karl Franz is faced with a realm beset from within and without. The return of Manfred von Carstein to his ancestral seat of power in Sylvania threatens to inflict the horrors of the vampiric wars on the Empire once more. Invading bands of orcs and beastmen grow ever bolder, striking deeper into the heartland of the Empire and melting back into the forests before any army can intercept them. On the quietest nights, the rumbling of machinery deep under the earth betrays the presence of a great and terrible under-empire, even as imperial officials refuse to even confirm the existence of these rumored ratmen. Above all, the long shadow of Archaon, ever-chosen of chaos, casts the mightiest realm of humanity into despair. In a sick parody of Sigmar's uniting of the human tribes 2,500 years before, Archaon has quested and fought to unite the disparate Chaos warbands and Norska clans to his rule. Now they march south, shadowed by demons and burning as they go, aiming to cut the heart from the Empire and drive all the world to ruin. And yet, in the face of the greatest existential threat in its long history, tales of victory and heroism continue to inspire the beleaguered defenders of Sigmar's realm. The memory of the Throne of Chaos invasion is still fresh in the minds of many aspiring gunners, where the infernal machines of the Chaos Dwarves were smashed apart at Nuln by the heavy batteries of the College of Engineers. Such a glorious sight was only matched by the Battle of 100 Cannons, the greatest amassing of artillery the world had ever seen, and the college's proudest day. To the common peasants of Middenheim, the exploits of Elector Count Boris Todbringer against the beastman warlord Kazrak One-Eye bring hope that these deadly raiders are at last being dealt with. To the soldiers of Volkmar's crusade and aspirant wizards alike, the fantastical efforts of Balthasar Gelt against von Carstein's ranks of the undead are a beacon of light, daring them to dream that these nightmares will finally be banished back to Sylvania for good. At the heart of it all stands Karl Franz, the Emperor and heir of Sigmar, bringing the thunderous rage of the Empire down upon those who would defy it. As a leader of armies, the Prince of Altdorf is proving to be unmatched, winning victories as formidable as the Siege of Bloodkeep against the Vampiric Order of Blood Dragons, and the Battle of Norduin against the Men of Bretonnia. As a statesman, his skill is unparalleled in the Old World. His alliance with the dwarves under High King Thorgrim Grudgebearer stands as strong as it did in the days of Sigmar himself, a certainty that brings hope to those whose homes lie in the shadows of the Great Mountains. Together with all the nations of the world determined to keep the madness of the ruinous powers at bay, the Empire is prepared to fight this coming storm of chaos to the very end. Though the end times grow ever closer, the strength of humanity is unwavering. In the great battles to come, it will be both hammer and anvil against the tide of horrors that descend from the lands of ruin. As long as the name of Sigmar Heldenhammer is upon the lips of the faithful, as long as the twin-tailed comet blazes across the sky, any who question the strength of humanity will find an answer in the Empire of Man.
The Templin Institute investigates the nations, factions, and organizations of alternate worlds. If you've enjoyed this video and would like to join the Templin Institute, consider pledging to our Patreon page. Along with increased security access, you'll be able to vote in polls to determine future topics, get custom wallpaper every week, and receive some other exclusive rewards.